Luce Irigaray's Democracy Begins Between Two is a profound exploration of the limitations of contemporary democracy, particularly its failure to adequately include women as fully recognized civil subjects. Through a series of essays, Irigaray calls for the establishment of civil rights that recognize women as distinct, yet equal subjects to men, arguing that such recognition is fundamental to the evolution of a true democracy. The text is structured around her vision of a relational model of democracy that begins with the acknowledgement and affirmation of the two sexes as equal, independent, and mutually enriching. Irigaray contends that the failure to address this foundative duality hinders the development of a democratic society that is inclusive, balanced, and just. At the heart of Irigaray's argument is the idea that democracy must extend beyond political and economic structures to encompass interpersonal and cultural dimensions. She asserts that the current framework of civil rights, rooted in a male-centric understanding of identity and agency, marginalizes women by failing to recognize their specific needs, desires, and modes of being. For Irigaray, this marginalization is not merely an oversight, but a structural flaw that perpetuates gender inequality and inhibits the potential for a genuinely democratic society. Her call for women to have a separate civil identity is not a demand for segregation, but a recognition that equality cannot be achieved through assimilation into a system that was not designed with women's experiences and identities in mind. Irigaray examines the complex interplay between biology, social conditioning, and identity, challenging the reductionist approaches that either naturalize or entirely dismiss gender differences. She argues for a nuanced understanding of feminine identity that acknowledges biological differences without allowing them to become a basis for oppression. Her approach seeks to transcend the binary oppositions of nature versus culture, proposing instead a dynamic model in which both men and women are free to develop as distinct but interconnected subjects. This vision extends to her critique of traditional family structures, which she sees as deeply embedded in patriarchal norms that limit the potential for genuine equality. By refounding the family on a civil basis, Irigaray envisions a space where relationships are defined by mutual respect and shared responsibility, rather than hierarchical roles. A recurring theme in Democracy Begins Between Two is the idea of love as a political and civil force. For Irigaray, democracy is not merely a system of governance, but a way of living that requires the cultivation of love, understood as the recognition and affirmation of the other. This vision of love extends beyond romantic or familial relationships to encompass all forms of human interaction. In this context, democracy begins between two individuals who recognize each other as equal yet distinct subjects. This relational model of democracy challenges the individualistic and competitive ethos that dominates contemporary political discourse, proposing instead a framework rooted in interdependence and mutual care. Irigaray's analysis also extends to the broader cultural and political landscape, particularly in the context of the European Union. She critiques the EU's approach to integration, arguing that it fails to address the cultural and gender dimensions of citizenship. Her 10 suggestions for the construction of the European Union reflect her commitment to creating a political and cultural framework that values diversity and fosters genuine dialogue between different identities and perspectives. These suggestions emphasize the importance of education, representation, and the cultivation of a two-subject culture in which men and women are equally recognized as civil subjects. The book also addresses the representation of women in culture and politics, highlighting the ways in which patriarchal norms shape perceptions of femininity and constrain women's agency. Irigaray calls for a radical rethinking of cultural narratives and symbols to create spaces where women can articulate their own identities and experiences. This process involves not only challenging existing myths, but also creating new ones that reflect the realities of women's lives and aspirations. Her critique of Europe's fascination with new myths underscores the dangers of cultural homogenization and the erasure of difference, which she sees as antithetical to the democratic ideal. Irigaray's emphasis on the question of the other reflects her broader philosophical commitment to alterity and dialogue. For Irigaray, democracy is not a static state, but an ongoing process that requires constant negotiation and renewal. This process begins with the recognition of the other as a subject in their own right, capable of contributing to the shared project of democratic life. Irigaray focuses on happiness as a political and cultural goal. She argues that politics should not be solely concerned with power and governance, but also with the creation of conditions that allow individuals and communities to thrive. This vision of politics as a source of happiness is deeply intertwined with her emphasis on love and relationality, suggesting that the health of a democracy can be measured by the quality of its relationships and the well-being of its citizens. Irigaray highlights the importance of language in shaping and transforming social realities. Her careful use of language reflects her belief that words have the power to create new possibilities for thinking and being. This linguistic sensitivity is particularly evident in her discussion of the representation of women, where she highlights the need for new symbols and narratives that reflect the complexities of feminine identity. By challenging the patriarchal norms embedded in language and culture, Irigaray seeks to open up new spaces for dialogue and creativity,